Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Imaginary Movie Podcast, a podcast where we dive into the 80s and we talk about a British movie. My name's David, and I shit 'em!
I'll have to explain why we find that quite so funny in just a few seconds. My name's Sam, and join us as I watch the films that Dave makes us so you don't have to.
I am wounded. I get a bad rap with you and Ross sometimes. Not totally unfairly, that's true.
100%
I think
justified.
the way that the taste, it's like a spectrum. It's like, the political spectrum. So I'm way on the left. I'm way on the left, like artsy, like wanky David Lynch films that make no sense and don't really have any plot and 14 hours long. I'm like, yes, I'm there for it. Fantastic. and Ross is like the other side, where if there isn't an action scene every 10 minutes, he's
a reactionary.
Like and you're somewhat of a floating voter where you're kind of centrist.
Did you just call me a centrist dad? Is that what you just done?
I did.
Am I a centrist dad? Okay. I mean, probably reasonably when it comes to his films. Politically, let's burn the fucking state down right now. But when it comes to watching, my movie taste, it's probably about right. Fair.
Yeah, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a case of, so what happens is I suggest we watch like an excellent movie like High Rise, excellent movie, and then you both hate it because obviously my taste is trash, and then my taste is trash forever going forwards. In fact, inside podcasting, the WhatsApp chat we have to discuss the podcast is called the Dave Nuremberg Trials, which is a rather off-colour joke about World War II. But also should give you some idea of these people's opinion of me. I didn't name it that. I didn't make that joke. You did.
Dave, it's a joke that I would have preferred not to share with the audience. Not that we're belittling war crimes in any way whatsoever. That's a legal statement. Thank you for that.
Podcast does not endorse trivializing war crimes.
No, but I do think that your movie selection sometimes does hit the level of war crime, just to counteract my previous statement.
In fairness, it usually comes from a place of I've watched a movie and really enjoyed it and want you guys to watch it and enjoy it as well, and it often doesn't pan out that way.
And what I would say is I'm maybe more centre-left in your analogy, because I think most of the time I do really enjoy your taste in movies. When we start hitting the fucking teen...
that's less artsy and wanky and more just sort of something wrong with my brain, I guess.
When we're working through Dave's therapy sessions on the podcast, because he's stuck as a 14-year-old or whatever it is, like that's when I'm less having fun. But
it's Dave's Arrested Development.
Excellent. But this movie, The Long Good Friday, 1980s Bob Hoskins crime thriller, I really enjoyed.
This is one of my favourite movies.
Wow,
this is
strong.
a criminally unknown movie. We discussed this. I really enjoy a movie you just sort of, you're there for, and this is the exact kind of movie where, like, there is a plot and it's quite convoluted, but mostly you're just kind of like watching things happen and you're enjoying the sights and the sounds, and that's kind of that's the height of movie going for me. Is I don't really want to have to, like, sometimes I don't really want to be like mentally challenged when I'm watching a movie, if that makes sense. And I don't mean mentally challenged, I mean challenged mentally. Does that make sense? Sometimes I don't want to have to think loads and like solve a mystery before the characters I've got on the screen are solving a mystery. Sometimes it's okay for me to solve it along with them, like in this movie where you absolutely aren't given the information to solve it before they solve it.
Yes, and that's... I was asking a lot of questions watching this movie. I was going... I mean, it was slightly late, and I was a bit tired, and but also, what's happening? Which British guy is this? Because they all look just like potatoes in this film because it's the 1980s.
There's a certain amount of that.
Everyone looks like a
British actors before probably like 2000 when they all started appearing in Hollywood movies. Like, there's a real... Everyone smokes 45 cigarettes before lunchtime, and then they have a steak, and then they smoke another 60 cigarettes and wash it down with a bottle of scotch. And they were doing that for 60 years of films before that.
2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps. You know what I mean? Like, it really is. It's quite funny. But this is a good film It's an interesting film. It's also a film I don't think we've really explored this genre before. Certainly not like we don't do very many British movies, which I think is probably a symptom of, again, they're not really in the cultural consciousness as the same, in the same way that I think American movies are, because of our transatlantic media consumption. But at the same time, they're also, I think, harder to engage with, especially ones from the past. Like it can be a bit more difficult. And this is a movie
have
where
a bit more of an ask.
Yeah,
and I kind of apply that to a lot of British. I mean, to name a few really big British movies, obviously you've got Clockwork Orange and 2001, like huge British movies, but very British, and a bit unapproachable and quite long. And like, again, they're asking you to sort of engage. The Ipcris Files, which I watched a few weeks ago with Michael Caine, again, it's kind of like it's the reason that we never heard of it and no one's talking about it is because it's the sort of thing that you would struggle more to get an American audience to engage with. Not because it's bad, just because it's a different aesthetic, and it's the pacing's different, and the shots are different, and even the colour palette. Like this film, it looks like Britain because everything is grey and brown.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was grey and brown until about 1998, more or less. Until Tony Blair got into office, like everything was brown and grey.
Yeah, then it was slightly redder, but still pretty brown, like maroon. Everything was maroon. That's something I'm going for.
We loved maroon because it was cheap. It's a working class colour, Sam.
I wasn't tying itself up, thinking it was better than it's
putting on airs
above its station.
Mauve, that's an upper class colour. Maroon was good enough for us.
We used to eat gravel from Middle Road, maroon tasting gravel. Yes, so this film is a good one. Let me just have a wee summary, which is an up-and-coming gangster is tested by the insurgents of an unknown and very powerful threat. I'm going to give you a hint. It's the IRA, which is kind of like in the 80s. That's quite a relevant cultural reference, isn't it? That the Irish Republicans are going around blowing shit up, which they were doing a fair bit of that, and so I think there's that must have been a useful, like, what I'm trying to say. I think I'm trying to say that when in the past, before like 9/11, like terrorists, it was the IRA.
Mentioned 9/11, listeners.
Yes, there we go. You win a prize. And I think this movie is this movie captures that pretty well in terms of what people were worried about in the 1980s, and. If you were a gangster in the 1980s, clearly that was a threat. You should watch out.
It's the sort of thing where a lot of Guy Ritchie's films, I think, take so much from this movie and movies like it, because they're trying to capture that Cockney sort of like. And Hoskins in this movie, so you've read the plot, but obviously that's not helpful at all.
No, it's terrible IMDb.
And the basic idea is that Bob Hoskins is like he is a gang leader who is looking to, he's a mobster basically, and he's looking to become legitimate. And how he wants to do that is basically he wants to build Canary Wharf. Heard of it? This movie is so prescient in some ways. He wants to get the money together to redevelop the Dockland in London at the time. And he's clever, he's intelligent, he's brutal, he's violent, he's stupid, he's all of these things all at once. So he goes to America to try and put together this deal and get some American capital to help to redevelop these docklands. And he says, there's billions to be made and blah, 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 blah. And it all rings true because it all fucking happened. Not when this movie was made, but in the intervening 4 decades, absolutely all of this happened.
Yeah.
And while he's away, basically, one of his lieutenants basically pisses off the IRA. That's the thing. We don't know it's the IRA. We kind of know it's the IRA from the start, but we don't know, but we know. And so the whole movie is then him trying to keep the American investors calm while also trying to like get his house in order, try and figure out the term he says is someone's having a poke at us. Who is it?
Mm-hmm. Now you've summed that up pretty succinctly, and it was very helpful for me because I was watching this bit again. I was a bit tired, but it's an interesting. The way that the film presents information is quite interesting because. Usually in movies, we get cutaways where we can see what's happening, and we understand a little bit ahead of the characters what's going on, and so we either see, right, we're going to take Bob Hoskins down because he's been pushing it, he's been trying, or he sent a guy over to us and we want to fuck him over because what his mate, what his guy did wasn't acceptable. Whatever, we get exposition and we get to understand the drivers, and the fun is watching the protagonist react to that. Whereas this movie kind of doesn't take that approach. Instead, we're drawn along and we're learning things as Hoskins learning things. So for me, I kind of felt it was a little bit difficult to follow at points. There were points where I'm going, what? The only clue I had is that I saw Pierce Brosnan as a young Pierce Brosnan and looked up his, the film on IMDb, and it said Irishman 1 is how he's credited. And I kind of wish I hadn't done that, because it obviously then went, it's the 1980s. Who were the Irish bad guys of the 80s? It's going to be the IRA. So, but I wonder how, as you go through the movie, if you can pick up on the clues. For me, I didn't really see any clues. It's more that it's just kind of like you're waiting for Hoskins to learn what's going on.
In the intervening 43 years since this movie came out, as you turn to dust, 1980 was 43 years ago.
We weren't
in
even
the intervening
alive
43 years, I think some things have been lost. I think that the opening sequence of this is that Colin, who's the guy who gets murdered in the swimming pool, he's in a pub.
They call him Balok.
Colin Baloche.
That's the slang.
He's in a pub.
Baloche.
He's in a pub in Ireland, and actually I thought this was like quite out there for 1980. And he's a gay man. He's picking up a man to go and have sex with. That man is Gibbs from Pirates of the Caribbean.
So we've got Raiders of the Lost Ark and we've got Pirates of the Caribbean. Okay.
Straight off the bat. So number one, he's in this pub. So we see him with a suitcase full of money. He takes some money out of it, winks at the driver who's driving him about, and then delivers the money. Then he goes to the pub, obviously, because it's 1980. What else are you going to do on an evening? There's no internet, and there's probably only 2 channels.
God. Jesus.
So, and exactly. And then the co-op might have repossessed your TV if you didn't pay the rent on it that week. These are all things that were happening in the UK in 1980. My mum's parents rented a TV until the late 90s.
My dad did this as well. He's probably listening and he can probably tell me about it at some point. But like renting a TV, yeah, that's a crazy idea, isn't it?
Well, it's not any crazier than like leasing a car now. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Or but like, it's just, that was the high-priced item back then that people couldn't afford to buy, so they rented it. So anyway, so they're in the pub, and what we see then is these honestly Irish guys, and they sound Irish and they look Irish, not to be racist, but they look Irish, in this house counting the money. They put it in all these piles, and then men with guns storm the building. So I think that we're looking at it and thinking, oh, who are those men with guns? Because we're the Mission Impossible generation, and we're like, oh, it's all like there's secret societies in secret societies. Whereas at the time, I think you would associate like tactical people with assault rifles as that's the army, like very clearly the British Army, especially because the characters in the building are Irish. I think that watching this at the time, you might very much more quickly say, oh, it's the IRA.
With the cultural goings on around in the 1980s, and the troubles are in full swing.
Because Northern Ireland in 1980 would have been a dangerous place to be. So you would have instantly been, oh, something's going on. Why they're only in Northern Ireland to deal with the IRA. That's literally the only reason you'd be there.
Yeah,
you know.
And again, I think this might be a case of me not really being awake, I suppose. But nonetheless, there was no points when I was bored during this film. There's no points where I'm like, I'm actually quite enjoying the fact that I'm discovering what's going on with Bob Hoskins' character, because at the start of the movie, everything's going up. Everything's coming up Millhouse for him. He's got the Americans coming in. He's got his
married to Helen Mirren in 1980.
Helen Mirren girlfriend. I mean, Jesus.
Not a bad get, Bob Hoskins, because you're 4'10" with the platforms on.
Potato. You look like a potato. Really sorry.
But, it's fine. He's been dead for 10 years. Let's not worry about it.
But he's doing He's doing well for himself, obviously, and we kind of know he's a bit of a geezer,
Bit of a
but
lad.
we're not really fully into like the fact that he's a proper gangster yet. And so he's getting this, and the Americans are coming, and he's blah blah blah, and he's trying to, they're on a boat, they're doing this like amazingly 1980s thing where they've got, you just imagine them serving meringues and tin peaches in cream, and like, just really it drips 1980s, which I think is not something we get to see in films that often from a British perspective. Like, we obviously get like Beverly Hills Cops, 1980s America, and it's great and we love it and that's fun, but we don't get to see the British side of that very often, or at least in the genre movies that we watch all the time.
And we don't get to see the British version, the working class version.
Yes,
I think is important as well, because I think this is a really
Good
working
point.
class movie, which is an odd pull for a movie about this quite wealthy couple, but everything around them is very. So the whole the backstory for Bob Hoskins' character, which we get a little bit of, is that him and he calls it his corporation, which again, Guy Ritchie is just sat in a movie theatre wanking in 1980, thinking one day I'm going to make all this, and his corporation, and basically him and a load of other. He's the biggest gangster in central in London, and the other boroughs are all run by other people. And there's like a peace. There's like we're not going to go after each other because we're all too busy making money because Thatcher's in power, and so there's just money fucking falling out of people's pockets in London, and that's somewhat historically accurate. Mostly falling out of poor people's pockets and into rich people's pockets, as much as like Bob Hoskins, who runs casinos and pubs and all sorts of things.
As was
prey on working class
economically
people.
designed at the time. Absolutely. Yeah.
But like all the characters we see, you've got the supporting cast of characters, I really like a lot of Razors, the sort of like the silent henchman with the big scar on his face.
I love this guy. I need who plays him, because I want to see what else he was doing, because PH oh my god his name. So he plays Razors in the film, and do you know what his real name is?
Sorry, go on.
PH Moriarty.
Yep.
Oh, that's he's also was in Lock, Stock and Two Barrels, whatever it is, the Guy Ritchie movie. But he was a boxer and longshoreman. Oh, this guy.
Yeah, and he just became an actor when he was like 45, in that grand British tradition of just like, don't take this the wrong way, Razors, I'm sure you've been dead for 20 years, but like really ugly men just deciding they're going to be actors.
He was in a film in 2001. I think he's still alive.
Really?
Holy shit.
Because he looked rough in 1980 when this came out. You've got a really good supporting cast of characters. You've got Bob Hoskins, you've got Razors. He's a great sidekick. He's going to cut people up, and you say go and murder those children, he's murdering those children. That's just it's understood. You've got Jeff, who's his like his friend. Who's he's the young up and comer. He's the his protege. This guy, interestingly, I watched this with a friend of mine from Leeds called Simon the first time I watched it, and we kept referring to him as Charlie Fairhead, because that's his character's name in Casualty. And my mum used to watch Casualty all the time.
I've just realised who it is. Yeah, he's been in Casualty
for 45 years.
Since 1986. 808. I think he might have just retired.
Yeah, maybe, or be about to retire, maybe. I think when I checked Wikipedia,
shit.
it said 2024, so I think he's maybe leaving, but he's in his 70s now. That's him.
I didn't
That's
connect.
a really, really young him, because obviously we saw him in Casualty, Sam, when we were kids, basically. Because I presume your mum watched Casualty again, because there wasn't that much on TV.
It was on before The Simpsons, maybe, on a Friday night?
Maybe.
Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
But obviously he was 20 years older when we were watching him. Anyway, so that's Charlie Fairhead. This was more or less the only film he ever did, and then he did Casualty for the rest of his career, and I'm sure made loads of money, so good on him.
Good for him.
But he's really good in this. Helen Mirren, obviously, is one of our estimable, female actors
Royalty.
of all time.
Yeah.
She really is one of the best British actors we've produced. Her and Hoskins are good.
But she is obviously, and obviously, she's got celebrity status and all that. But a bit like Bob Hoskins when you say, "Oh yeah, he's great," and you think, "Okay, so name a movie that you've seen him in," and I'm like, "He's in Enemy of the Gates for like a bit, like you know."
From
And
Roger
I think
Rabbit.
Roger, okay, right there's a good one, right? And Helen Mirren,
Please.
you'd maybe say, okay, it's the Queen, and then you're doing the exact same thing. I think there's a thing of like a lot of these actors who've been around so long,
You're familiar with
we've
the
missed
actor.
we've missed all of the movies when they were young, and this is a good example of one of these films. Same with Hoskins, same with Mirren, and same with the guy from Casualty as well. Of like, yeah, they were making great movies before they were big, almost, or before they had this like
Well, this was
aura.
the breakthrough role for Hoskins, definitely, in terms of like leading man status.
Yeah,
And it's just it seems like a really good canvas for an actor, this sort of movie, where it is just it's a character piece, and it's the characters, it's more about the emotional journey than it is about the physical journey. I mean, obviously you've got car bombs going off, and some of the stunts are really cool and some of them aren't so good, and the cinematography is really like going for it. But actually this movie kind of like sits on Bob Hoskins' shoulders. I mean, let's talk about the end scene. I know obviously you hate jumping around, but the very final scene of this movie, I think,
let's
really
do
is
it.
what stamps it home for me as like this just fantastic. I love it when a movie just puts a bow on it and be like, right, and that's the movie, and you just get to fade out, and you don't get like 17.
So this
fucking
is
post-credit
the
scenes
bit
to,
where
like ruin it
he's
for you and upset you.
yeah. So he's basically been found out, hasn't he? And he's in the car with the two Irish guys with Pierce Brosnan,
And Patrick
he's
Harper from Sharp.
there we go. So he's done for, basically. He's done for, isn't he? And he knows that he's been that they've got him, and we don't know what's going to happen to him. And so we just get this, like,
We know.
oh yeah, but we get this exquisite filmmaking of the camera is right in Hoskins' face, and it's not even can't even see his full face. It's his eyes in his mouth, isn't it? That's it, and it's basically just watching him react, and it's a mix of initially it's kind of shock, and then it's also annoyance and respect almost. He's kind of going, and then he's like evolving into bile and anger, and he's like, I'm going to fuck these. And it doesn't know how. We don't know how he's going to get out of it, if he can get out of it. But we get to see that, like,
Well, it's the realization that he's
processing.
been beaten, isn't it? This is a tough man, and the backstory again is that he's gone from being like presumably some sort of petty street criminal to like running this vast criminal empire. We see from the abattoir scene that he's kind of like he's the biggest dick in London, basically. He has no qualms about like hauling all these other gangsters in and like murdering them if he has to, beating them up, all of that. He has vast resources at his disposal. He's talking about this multi-million-pound development of Canary Wharf, like, and then to have that boil down to basically he doesn't understand, because, and again, I love the London-centric focus of this, which has only gotten worse since 1982 when this movie came out.
Yeah.
Like, that the country doesn't exist beyond London, and so his lack of understanding about the IRA and about what they're fighting for, because in his world and his rules, like, this isn't how things are done. He's killed the leaders. He's made a statement, and like in any other situation, that would mean he'd have won, and they'd have backed off, and he'd be safe, and that's the rules of his world. Except this is the fucking IRA, and they don't play by your rules. They're not interested in developing Canary Wharf. They're not interested in running casinos and pubs.
Well, they
They are
don't
fighting
they?
a war of liberation. I mean, again, I'm not trying to politicize that statement, but that is the outlook, and what the councillor says.
Well,
They're radicals. They're I don't think he says jihadis, but he says they're
No. They say they're political. They're not about money, and this is the thing that Hoskins. That's what he understands, isn't it? Is that he can pay people off, or he can muscle them out, or he can kill them if he needs to. But if he can't do that, there isn't, like, you don't have any power here. And this is the thing that he doesn't understand, I think, probably until right at the end of the movie, that
and that's what you're seeing in the back of the car, is that realization that not only was he wrong, but everything he built that's it, it's gone without him, and the whole project, and like his life, and it's that deflating of ego, which I think, and it's just such a. We call it face acting, which is silly because all acting is face acting mostly. Like most acting is face acting.
Yeah, but I
it's
tell you what, a lot of actors can't do that. A lot of very famous Hollywood actors can't sell what Hoskins sells in the back of this car at the end of the movie. You know, so to support your points about Guy Ritchie wanking in the cinema watching this movie, which is just that's a vivid imagery as on form, Dave. I remember this. There's a shot similar to this at the end of The Gentleman, which is a previous episode. I'm not sure that I don't think you were there, but I think me and Ross watched it, and this is it. You know, it's a Guy Ritchie movie. Hasn't that also got
Pierce Brosnan in
it? Maybe, but this is a London gang centric. You know, it's a Guy Ritchie movie. It kind of follows the tropes, but it very much. And Wikipedia confirms that it is referencing this movie as well, which is a nice little homage, I suppose. But there's so much of there's like the journey to get to this point though, at the back of the car where Hoskins has been beaten, and what's interesting about this film is that like he's quite a passive actor, isn't he? Like where we go from the start of the movie, where he's on top of the world, the Americans are coming in, and he's glad handing, and he's fantastic, and we're gonna get this thing, we're gonna build a Millennium Dome, it's gonna be brilliant. Like he's doing all of this stuff, and all of the things that go wrong, they're not really because of anything that he's done. He hasn't.
He's quite powerless in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting way of presenting this story, because you could have a tale of Hoskins is the big man, he's the overlord, and he rules the roost. He's the top dog, you know. And then the film is about his excesses and that he's pushed it too far, and that just if only he had just been happy with what he had. And the film's not about that. The film is one of his goons fucked off to Ireland and made a massive mistake, and he's getting punished for it. He doesn't even know what's going on.
Even more senseless than that, Sam, because the actual thing I think is that Colin stole $5,000 from this thing, but the actual problem is the IRA think that Colin informed the British Army about this money drop. That's what they think, and they think that these leaders who are counting the money from the councillor, they think that they've been arrested because Colin told the government about them. That's the problem. It's not the $5,000 that Colin took. Do you know what I mean? That's like it's the proportionate response of like, well, you fucked with the IRA, and they didn't, and that's the whole thing about this movie is that they didn't. No one really. I mean, Jeff fucked up a little bit, but this isn't really anyone's fault. But unfortunately, it's the IRA and a paramilitary guerrilla group. There's no one to reason with. You can't send a letter. You can't make a phone call. You can't go and pay homage. There's no one to talk to. The whole way the organisation is constructed, you can't negotiate with them. That's the whole point. That's the strength of a paramilitary insurgent force. You know, I look at Al Qaeda with 9/11, like, you know, and in Afghanistan and things like. There's a reason why you can't negotiate with people, and you can't really make war on insurgency.
There's no figurehead, is there? There's no, and I just think that's a really interesting thematic choice. Like, I just think that's a really thoughtful, clever. You said he's powerless, and that powerlessness, I think, is like one of the most exciting things about this movie. It's a thing that as all this is going on, and again. Kind of a bit hazy on what happened in Ireland because the film waits right until the kind of end point for all this to come out, but it doesn't matter because when what's the first act of Retribution? There's the bombing of the pub,
the car bomb. There's a car bomb.
The car bomb
outside the
that's
church
it.
On Good Friday, hence the name.
Trying to kill his mother, trying to kill Hoskins' mother. Is that right?
It's unclear who it blows up and it kills the driver of this car.
The driver, And there's another one, isn't
and
there? There's a car bomb, and then
there's a bomb in there's a bomb in a pub, or there's a fire in a pub. A bomb in a pub. They find a bomb in a casino, but it hasn't gone off.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Which they're just swinging around, knocking off things. Like I'm like,
Yeah, but again, he kind of like
explosives in there.
showcases the power of Hoskins because he's got the police, he's got this like tame policeman, and he's got this tame counsellor that he's been paying them off for years, and it's kind of like and again, it's leaning on the tropes of you can kind of see another cut of this movie where Hoskins wins, where if you took the IRA out of this and it was just a gang war movie, like Hoskins would win in the end. He would,
yeah.
and it's kind of, but it's not that. It's the
Antithesis.
That's the one of that, and it's kind of like so he's doing all of the things that you would do in a tropey gangster movie. He's going around and beating up black people because that's something that we did in 1980 to resolve problems.
Oh
apparently.
God, yeah.
He calls in all of these gangsters and he hangs them from meat hooks in one of the best bits of cinematography in the film, where the camera is hanging from a meat hook and like going around the abattoir. It's amazing.
My God.
I love. This is a real 70s, 80s movie. I don't know if we've touched on that yet.
Oh, 100%.
And the cinematography
100%.
is 100% 70s. It's a real like
gritty, visceral, like almost upsetting and discordant. Like, and I don't even mean what's happening on screen. I just mean the way they're presenting it is like it's in your face. It wants you to feel. It wants you to feel the jolt when the abattoir, because there's a track, isn't there, above. That goes in an abattoir that they hang the carcass from and they pull it along to the next stage. And there's a point where it stops and the camera gets jolted because of it stopped and you feel it.
Yeah.
You feel the jolt. You feel like the force of the human being that's hanging from this. And then one of the guys, again, I do think the film isn't really that good at presenting who's who and what's going
Doesn't
on.
matter
But anyway,
who's who. These are just guys.
When he's getting, he's beating the shit out of someone who's hanging upside down from
A meat hook.
from a meat hook in an abattoir, you think, wow.
It's an amazing scene. It does beg the question of like, because they arrive in a van. There's a van full of guys hanging from meat hooks. And it's just like, that seems like a lot of work to put them on the meat hooks before you get them to the abattoir.
Yeah, and these are like the sub bosses or whatever they call them in
these are the
American
gangsters,
mafia.
the lads basically. This is what you do in a gangster movie. You round up the people who it might be. So someone is trying to knock you off and take your patch. So you round up all the people that you think it might be, and this is what we do here. And then the police arrive and tell you it's the IRA. And you think, well, fuck. And then I love the scene. He's like, let them all go, give them $1,000 in expenses. And it's like, right, well, I'll just pay them off and I'll fuck off and that's fine. I know these guys and money will work because I can solve my problems by just paying them off.
Exactly, because that fits the game, doesn't it? That fits the modus operandi of the gangsters.
But we then move into like the different tropes. So we have the... this guy has been in loads of like British soaps as well. Errol, they call him in the movie, the black guy. They cut up with a machete.
This is horrible.
Basically, they go and see a snitch, and they see a snitch, and we get some peak 70s, 80s tits. Bing, bing, bing.
No, let's stop there. Let's explain that. What do we mean by that, Dave? Tell me.
Casual
you
nudity
be the front
in
for
a
this.
movie that's not even, I would say, not even overly sexualized nudity. It's just a naked woman, and she's just there, and then she's not there. And it's fine.
Because 1980,
and guess what, Disney? Nobody was fucking extremalized. No one was radicalized by this. It's just a pair of tits.
And because I think it is something that we've identified, isn't it? Is that in 70s and 80s movies, we get some 80s tits. We get some. We're just going to have some casual.
I think it must be a ratings thing.
Unremarkable
I think it must
nudity.
be like a change in the ratings where you could have casual nudity in more or less any movie, I think, as long as it wasn't sexual in nature. And then I think that must have changed because there really is like a dividing line of movies where suddenly it's like everything's Terminator 2, where we can have all the gore and violence and stuff, but sexuality is just gone. You can't have the casualness.
Janet
anymore.
Jackson nipple slip, maybe. That would have like that might be a thing that affected it in America. So that's fun. We enjoyed that. We let's talk about that for another 5 minutes. I think let's really just dive into the detail of that.
Two white men talking about tits. The podcast. God, we'd make $1 million.
The podcast, the movie. So all this is really good. Like, it's really good. And I love the chase. I love the sense of everything's unraveling for this guy, and we don't know what's going on and how's, like, we're with him in that unknown, and that's really fun and really engaging. I also think, like, just the general spectacle of the movie is quite well presented as well. Like the pub blowing up, and then they're walking around, and he's having a go at the barman for not stopping this pub from getting blown up. Like, what is this guy got to do? You know, like, how
the casino's
how
the
is
same, because he's telling this guy, like, you don't remember anything odd happening? And he was like, well, no, apart from the bomb, no, nothing odd happened last night. And he's like, what do you expect me to do? Search everyone? I make money. I made money. It's fine.
And it's that mundanity. It's the mundanity of it all, which I think is quite, like, it's not cinematic because it's a British movie, and I do skip forward a little bit and think to Goodfellas, which is not really the same movie, but I think there is something similar in the characters. The characters are similar. I think the cinematography is a different planet. Obviously, I don't even mean quality wise.
The realism of the criminality, I think.
Yeah,
it's not the Godfather where. You know what
it's
I mean?
not
There's
noble
a grandeur to it, and it's like
Shakespearean. No,
yeah.
But Hoskins' character reminds me a little bit of De Niro in Goodfellas, in that there's this violent edge to him, and he's willing to inflict that. I mean, not directly, because he gets his goons to do it, but there's a violence to him, which I think is
all the best tropey mobster characters, like gangster characters. The way that they really shine is that they're never more than a couple of minutes, like they're never more than 20 seconds from ripping someone's throat out.
Yeah.
And there's kind of like, you get that from Hoskins in this movie, and you get that from De Niro and Pesci as well in Goodfellas, where they're really only ever like one bad word from violence, like of some form, and that being something in your toolbox. And we look at this as being, you know, like with the Wake Generation and all of that, and so, you know, we're quite soft. Like, I can't even imagine a situation where I would punch somebody. I don't really know how I'd do it. God help me, it doesn't ever happen. But like, these characters are scary because violence is just there. They're just, you know, oh well, I'll solve this problem. I'll hit him, and that will solve the problem. And I'm like, well, hold on, let me get my board out. And I'm like, I don't follow, because I'm not. That's not the thing. But that's why they're intimidating. That's why they're scary, because that's not how people act. Most people don't use violence as like the, oh well, I'll be violent, and that will resolve the problem.
Yeah, problem solved. No, totally. So like Goodfellas, and like a lot of action. I mean, less so like what's the one with the "say hello to my little friend" quote? Scarface. Less so that, which is like over the top.
Cartoonish.
Yeah. But more of those more grounded movies, and maybe Goodfellas isn't that.
Goodfellas is on the edge, but there's still like a.
But there's an element of truth there, which I think that film managed to capture. I think this film really does capture that for me. It captures that, like, just sense of what's happening as a gangster in the 1980s, and because he's trying to go straight, because he's trying to gain a certain degree of respectability through his construction, through his. He wants to build, you know, the Millennium Dome and all this other stuff. Not literally, of course. Just don't give yourself. That's just my joke. But like, there's all of this reality as well. And there's
a complex character development going on, and I think we should talk about Helen Mirren in the context of this as well, because I think she's an important part of the movie, an important facet. And I hate to say this and trivialize Helen Mirren's character down to being a facet of Bob Hoskins' character, but she is in a way. Because she's the doorway to respectability. She's obviously upper class, and Bob Hoskins obviously isn't. You know, she's obviously like more educated than he is. She's more urbane. She's a bit more articulate than he is. And you can tell that that is the driving force for him to be like, no, I want to be more articulate. I want to be more urbane. I want to be. And he's a Thatcherite. He's a fucking Thatcherite, and he wants to like, he's a yuppie, and he wants to
snorting
make
coke,
money.
And
yeah, exactly,
and making money and doing all these things. There's a good. I think it's a really good point about Mirren, and there's a point in the movie, where the American dude's getting a bit flustered. He's, and because Hoskins is, he doesn't have the social graces in the same way
at all,
and so he's like pressing him, and I mean the American says, don't rush me, and then of course here comes Mirren, who glides into the room, and just perfectly says, let's give the man some time to, let's give him some space, let's let him unpack, come on, and it's like, and then I love the look. And it's just, and I wonder if it's direction or if it was Hoskins just deciding to do this. But as he's leaving the room, he looks back and he gives him the fucking hard ass stare of, okay, my girlfriend has just sorted the situation out in a very graceful, socially, really good social graces. But I want you to know that I'm watching you as well, so don't fuck around. Let's get this deal done. And I just think that's brilliant, quiet filmmaking,
And Mirren's character kind of epitomizes that in the movie. Like she gets the job of entertaining the Americans mostly throughout the movie. Of like, and even the counselor before they arrive has a big speech about how basically all Americans want to come to Britain and be talked down to by the upper class. Like that, I think that's literally the line. It says all Americans want to come, and they want basically like they want the nobility to like treat them like shit because that's what they expect and it's what they like, and that's kind of what Mirren. It's not treating them like shit, but that's kind of like in their interactions. Mirren is the one who's urbane, and Mirren is
they
one
want
who's
Downton
like,
Abbey, don't they?
Intelligent. Whereas when Hoskins is interacting with Charlie, the American guy, and the lawyer, it's the opposite. They're the urbane ones. They're the cultured ones, and Hoskins is the because he's working class. And again, there's a whole like thing going on here. That's why I mentioned the Thatcherite thing, like because it really is an aspect of this of like. Bob Hoskins is like so clearly working class in this movie, and Mirren's so clearly upper class, and the Americans sort of sit somewhere in between, and it's all at odds with everything else in the movie, but in a perfect way where it lets you understand so much more about the characters. And again, this is something you don't get in American movies, partly because we're not as familiar with their class system, because they don't have a class system like we have a class system, but we're not as familiar with the social niceties of America, whereas we are familiar with this, so it feels real. It feels familiar. You feel at home in this movie because even though it's been 43 years since this was made, these class divisions still exist to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's all about like those soft skills, isn't it? That you can use.
We don't have because we went to state schools.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I would say public school, but that actually means private school. It's very confusing. I don't have a handle on it.
I've never
because I didn't go to public school or private school. I don't know.
Yeah, shut up, oik.
Apparently,
I know. I think the class element of this is really interesting, and I think what for me it raises the movie above like what I was expecting, which to be honest. I pretty low. I mean, again, I love.
I also recommended Teen Wolf, so it's somewhere between the two, isn't it?
I love your taste in movie, as we discussed. I love like that you have such a style, but I do think there's some times where you can just get, a movie's working so hard to present itself in one way, and I think this movie, if done wrong, it could really be presenting itself as a hard gangster movie that's about violence, that's about death, that's about power. But because we've identified, I think, that Hoskins is pretty powerless throughout the rest of the movie, what you end up with is this guy's maybe not life, but like his empire is unraveling.
Oh, he's definitely getting murdered at the location they're driving to, like 100% without doubt.
Surely, and what a brilliant thing to not show that as well. I mean, to go back to that last shot of the movie just for a second.
It's so restrained, Sam.
Oh,
it's
and
even
how
Casino
rare.
to talk about.
Hold on,
Scorsese
sorry,
again.
sorry. Just before, just to on that word restrained, right? How fucking rare is that in modern movies now? How many films do we watch where we get to see everything? We get to see 40,000 robots emerging from the sky, and we get to see Hulk personally rip apart 20 of them, and then another Iron Man comes in. It's like, because of the CGI and because of all, we just get to see everything. And I can't remember the last time I saw a shot like that in a modern movie where we just had nothing but
It
the
tends
actor.
to be like the more, again, I'm going to say artsy wanky is like our parlance, and that's not necessarily accurate, but some
Yeah,
of the more artsy wanky movies, like a lot of the Coen Brothers movies, are somewhat similar in that, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not telling a traditional movie tale where the hero is introduced and then they have the all is lost moment and then they save the cat moment and then they get the princess and they ride off into the sunset. And that you can apply that to fucking the whole MCU, is basically that whole, for that formula.
yeah,
And when a movie gets away from that, when you're telling a story, but you're telling that story, you aren't telling like a movie story. And this movie is the same. You're telling a story, and that story ends with Bob Hoskins realizing that he's failed and that these people have got the upper hand on him, and he misjudged the situation and all of the things that come along with that in that moment. And then you just cut to black, and the score's bombastic. Like, I think I was reading a bit of trivia that apparently the director was sat in the front seat of this car giving Bob Hoskins direction, and basically they couldn't make that quiet enough, so they just muted the whole scene and then bumped the score up to hide because that was the best take they had. And it was like, but it just works. And having the grace and the belief in your movie to just say and cut and the movie's over, not next time on the longer Good Friday, like,
yeah. Or even to see him get out,
yeah,
or even to have him figure out a way of getting out of this. And I think, you know what, I think that one of the things that I think what you can see in this movie is that there is a clear intentionality. There's a clear story they want to tell, and that's about this guy's downfall and how he's gone from top of the world to the to being bullied, you know, by this terrorist group, so-called terrorist group. But just to make that a non-political
again,
statement.
we're not trying to politicize the IRA,
No,
like
no.
at all.
So I just think like how well constructed it is. It goes to the thing that we don't get to see in movies, and frequent listeners will maybe recognize this, is like, wow, there's themes in this movie. It's not just we're presented with stuff and then we have to just figure out what we think about it. It's they knew what they wanted from the start, and we get thematic elements through this film, and the powerlessness is a theme.
The directors, we talked about editing a lot recently. Nowadays, they'd have made this movie, and then the studio would have had them reshoot the ending because it doesn't set up 1,400 sequels.
Oh.
And do you know what I mean? And so that's part of the problem, is that we no longer, a lot of movies, especially big studio pictures now, I don't think directors have and writers have the freedom to like put their the story they want to tell on screen, because they're kind of at the mercy of, well, this didn't test well and we don't like this, and take this out and change that name. And there was some of that in this movie. I think the name was the Paddy Effect or something initially. Like,
that was, I think, the shooting
offensive
name. Yeah, that was like the development name, I think. Yeah, so maybe not.
But like, obviously, the vision of this movie, and I hate to say that because again, wanky artsy stuff. Like, the vision of this movie is concise and it's together. Again, like talking about the Coen Brothers movies as like a non-Guy Ritchie alternative to this. It's not necessarily gangster movies, but again, it's telling you a story, and it's not necessarily like a satisfying arc for every single character, but you are being told a story.
Yeah,
you know,
totally. I'm just reading on Wikipedia that the that this was made, so yeah, under the title of Paddy Factor, the original story, blah, 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 and it was basically going to be put on TV, and then the film was scheduled to be televised with heavy cuts in 1981. Because of the planned cuts in the late 1980, Hansen attempted to buy back the film to prevent ITV screening it. The cuts, he said, would be excruciable and added up to 75 minutes of film that was literal nonsense. And so before the ITV put it on, the rights were bought by George Harrison, as in the Beatles company, Handmade Films, for 200 grand less than the production costs, giving it a cinema release. So it like, as much as we're talking about how, in the 80s things were free and you could do, like, this was still languishing under the
studio still existed, and
or not even studios, but TV, like the TV, because British cinema didn't have the same model. So it just,
crazy,
as I say,
really,
this
it
film
happens though. You remember? I don't think you've seen it. Once Upon a Time in America, the 4-hour Sergio Leone film.
I have tried to watch that twice.
It's fantastic. Another one of my favourite movies. It is 4 hours long, but you kind of finish it thinking, is it finished already? No, you don't at all, because it's 4 hours is a long time.
It's long.
But when that was originally released, I think there's a 2-hour, 20-minute cut of it that the studio insisted. So the cut, apparently the cut is one of the worst films most of the critics had seen. And then they screened the full version, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! Why would you cut it down?" So that's the version we watch now. Isn't the fucking bastardized theatrical version? It's the full version, and so it's always tough, isn't it? And again, like, this movie, if it had been like cut down to nonsense, would we remember it the way we do? Well, not what I say we do, because you only watched it yesterday, but that generally, I think this is a really well-regarded movie, quite rightly, because it's fantastic and influential, and just like, it's not even a movie where I want to, I want to be there, and I'm like, no, I just enjoy being there for the ride.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more influential than we can maybe give credit, to the movie, because not that it's inventing, obviously, the gangster drama at all, because that's,
I think most British gangster films, especially Guy Ritchie, but it's now gone to the point where like this movie's the grandfather of a lot of the movies that are coming out now that are based on the Guy Ritchie stuff that stole from this, not that cribbed from this movie.
Yeah,
totally. So, but I do think it formalised a lot of the stuff we get in British gangster movies, especially the kind of London gang aspect, and the Cockney likely guys, and all of that is very much of that. I can't believe you haven't mentioned it yet, Sam. This is the second movie we've done in about 6 weeks where somebody is viciously murdered by a bottle on a boat.
This was, because the last one, Cocktail,
the Tom Cruise movie, that's right.
It wasn't murdered, he killed himself, which I think...
Murdered by himself, under the law, Sam. Still illegal.
Going back and listening to that previous episode, listener, you should 100%.
We talk about very little else apart from the suicide on the boat.
And also go on YouTube and watch my fantastic edit of that movie, full of comedy and good fun. Like, comment, subscribe.
Like, comment, subscribe.
You were deeply upset by that scene. You were quite visibly affected by just how brutal it was, and I wonder if you were, because there's something about being killed by a bottle.
The reason I was upset by it in Cocktail is because Cocktail is the bartending movie with Tom Cruise being sexy, and I just wasn't expecting it. This movie, it kind of like it's the peak. It's kind of like the crescendo of Bob Hoskins, the worst day of Bob Hoskins' life, basically, because most of this movie takes place in the same day. It is the crescendo of the worst day of
Who
Bob
dies?
Hoskins'
Who
life.
gets killed?
It's Charlie Fairhead, or Jeff, for the listeners who actually watched the movie.
So
and know what the character
once he
are.
admits what he's done with the Irish
and again,
situation,
it's a really important character moment where Bob Hoskins is this he's this thug. That's his that's how he got to the position he's in, is because he was the man who was quicker to fucking glass somebody than the guy he glassed, and that's how he became influential. That's how he became running this gang. That's how he had these aspirations about building the Millennium Dome and the Shard on Canary Wharf.
The Shard, the walkie-talkie, I think, is another one as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this moment where he loses his temper and he loses his shit, and this guy has basically fucked all of his shit up, to use the modern parlance. And so he just grabs his bottle and hit and just stab, and the camera, a bit like Psycho, it goes with you as you're stabbing him in the throat, and it's less visceral. Like, I think it's a really good effect. I think it really works, but it's less visceral than the suicide in Cocktail. I think because it's not incongruous with the rest of the movie. It's by far the most like violent bit of the movie. And there's a great bit of trivia apparently where apparently there were quite a lot of gangsters hired as extras on this, and someone who was on set when this scene was happening and the stabbing earlier, apparently like quietly told one of the ADs that that's not how you stab someone, like not in a, and the guy was like,
oh, cheers, mate. That's great. Yeah, I'll speak to the director.
The Godfather star loads of people who were actual like in the mafia, basically.
And you can tell because they just
they can't act.
They just look like, and they cannot act for shit because they're totally.
This movie again, like, we just want some tough Londoners, and it's like, well, where are we going to get tough Londoners? Let's go around some pubs, and half of them are going to be hardened criminals. But the scene where on the boat, and it's so you've got the grandeur of Bob Hoskins' new life versus like juxtaposed with the violence and the anarchy of his old life. And wonderful. Jeff, who kind of represents he's his protege. He keeps mentioning how Jeff went to school, and he I don't know whether that means it's 1980, whether he finished school or whether he went to uni or whatever. But
to you, yuppie
it all
point.
comes crashing down. And it's a real fuck.
Yeah,
it's not all going to be okay. We aren't going to resolve this.
Yeah. Jeff is the yuppie though, isn't he? He is the 80s. He's smooth. He's almost the antithesis of Hoskins in that sense of like, this guy's the up and comer, but he's part of the system. Jeff
is the next generation, so he is like Hoskins, where he's quite working class, but he went to school. He finished school, I think, is the implication, and apparently in Bob Hoskins Corporation, there's only like 2 or 3 of you who actually went to school,
as opposed to someone who was born in the 1940s. Would Hoskins be? Do you know 40s. What I mean? Like, we're talking someone who is a baby boomer and not a Gen X, I suppose, maybe.
Yeah.
Whereas
Jeff is 10 or 15 years younger, and the implication is, or even though actually I was looking at the ages, there's only 4 years between them in age.
Yeah,
and
they do dress him up.
You look like a potato.
And he remains so. Especially, go back to Ending the Gates. Oh my God. My God.
But again, it's this wonderful scene of violence, and like, we haven't really seen Bob Hoskins do anything violent up until this point, really. He's kind of there in a passive way where he's telling people to commit violence. But it's, I could watch this movie again now. I've seen this like 5 or 6 times, and I only watched it for the first time 4 or 5 years ago.
It's one of those really like captivating movies, and again, just back to that point about like, I was a little bit confused going through, but I think in some ways that's the point, isn't it? Because you're supposed to be befuddled. You're supposed to be a little bit, it's supposed to be discordant, because that's how Hoskins feels. That's how as you say, it's the worst day of his life, and almost channeling that. And I think it's one of those movies again that really does improve on a rewatch, because you don't have to worry about that anymore. You know what's going on, and so what you can do is enjoy the content. You can enjoy what's presented to you. And
like any really good movie, the more you watch it, the funnier it gets. Like, there's quite a lot of really funny like lines in this. We said at the beginning, we haven't obviously explained it yet. Why we find the phrase "I shit 'em" like the funniest thing in the world. And it's Sean Bean. As anything, it's about Sean Bean. Previous episode on Sharp. In Sharp, Sean Bean, he's a soldier in the Napoleonic Wars. He's on a hill, shooting at some Frenchmen, obviously, and he shouts, "What you waiting for? Your cavalry? "I shit him," and he's screaming this at retreating French soldiers that they're shooting in 1810 or whenever it is. And it's such a, like, it's just Sean Bean talking like Sean Bean talks, but it's just so it's great.
I think it connects to your, obviously, you know, from Yorkshire as well, and just that general attitude of, you know, it don't matter what you're saying, you know, whatever it is, I shit them. And to have
it doesn't make any sense. It's not English, but it's great. And Bob Hoskins says it in this movie, and you're like, it's just so funny. And the other one I really liked was, so because they don't want the police involved, when his friend Colin gets stabbed at the swimming baths, they don't call the police, they call Bob Hoskins. And he arrives and has the body taken away to the abattoir. And they move him in an ice cream van because it's the only refrigerated van they've got. And Bob Hoskins goes, "Going out like a raspberry ripple. There's a lot of dignity in that." Like, that's the line. And we don't pause to laugh at it. We just move on. But it's like, he's quite funny. Like, it's quite funny.
I did not notice that line. That is, he's out genuinely in the movie.
As they're loading Colin's body into the ice cream van and it's driving off, Bob Hoskins,
going out like a raspberry ripple.
It's meant to be like, fuck's sake, this is this is horrible. He's like, "Going out like a raspberry ripple. There's a lot of dignity in that," like sarcastically. And again, it's so British, and it feels like it's just comfortable in that way because it's.
Get that line in your movie, Scorsese. I'd challenge you.
In a way that I wonder if, like, Scorsese movies and like gangster movies, mobster movies, I wonder if there's a similar like familiarity if you're from New York, for instance. Not even necessarily Italian American, but like
there mustn't there?
You remember the era and the way that people speak and the way that people act maybe feels familiar, which we don't get. And that's part of the reason why I enjoy those movies so much, is because it's this alien kind of like, I only know it from movies, but I enjoyed this because I know this from like living in Britain. Like, people still talk not quite like this, but like a bit like this, and it's all very familiar.
Your time as a 1980s gangster, it's all very familiar to you, isn't it? I understand.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Well, no, it's just what I mean. It's the sarcastic response of your best mate has been killed. They're loading him into an ice cream van, and you make a sarcastic joke about that, and that's not understood to be, my God, this guy's absolutely heartless. It's like, this is a really shit situation, Bob.
If you're killed in a dramatic way, I only wish to come up with a line as funny as that to send you off. You know, if I can reach that level of humour as you die. You know,
well, it's the funniness.
A horrible death.
You have to say it with a bitterness that I, as a British person, if I was alive, obviously I'm dead in this situation, I would understand that you were actually terribly upset. But what you'd said was a really funny thing. Like, an American would be horrified by that.
Because they're so literal. They have no nuance.
Exactly. And there's the nuance of this movie. And I'm just in love with this movie. And it's not even like the director made loads and loads of movies and loads of really well-made movies. It's just, this is singular in a way that I think I'll keep coming back to it and keep recommending it to people. I mean, I guess you and Ross. I even think Ross would have enjoyed this. Although maybe he would have got bogged down in Irish pedanticness.
Maybe. But I think you're right. I think Ross would have enjoyed it. I think it is a really enjoyable movie, so I would definitely say it's a strong recommend for me, especially if you're into any kind of gangster movie, because you're going to get
If you like Guy Ritchie movies, you'll like this, because Guy Ritchie liked this, which is why Guy Ritchie's Guy Ritchie.
And that's why he was sat in the cinema. I can't even say it anymore.
The audience knows what I mean, Sam.
That's powerful. That's powerful imagery
stuff
that I'm not quite able to especially because she'd been in Australia as well, you know.
Guy Ritchie Australian? I did not know that.
Apparently. I think so. We heard that on the last episode.
We didn't even use it on our cocktail episode.
No, I think we did, and that's where I got it from. I'm pretty sure, yeah. So, audience, I'm going to leave you with just another reminder of Guy Ritchie wanking to this movie in the mid-1980s.
In the theatre.